Now the Hyperion is a one-of-a-kind weapon. There's nothing similar that really comes close to it. But it's also a very strange weapon at the same time too. The Hyperion was added into Hypixel Skyblock in November 2020, which means that this weapon is almost 4 years and 9 months old. You may ask, why is the Hyperion such a strange weapon? Well, it's got nothing to do with its abilities, the fact that you can teleport and explode and impact and so on. I'm talking more about the fact that this weapon is almost 5 years old and it's still pretty much the best weapon in the game. Or is it? We'll probably find that out just a little bit later in this video. And when you think other weapons that were added at around about the similar time included the likes of the Livid Dagger, which was considered one of the better melee weapons at the time. You know, if you compare the base stats of an item like the Livid Dagger nowadays to other competitors, like the newly buffed Dark Claymore or a Midas Sword, you can see just how well that 210 base damage Livid Dagger held up over the years. Not very well. And while it's still a decent weapon, it's still a decent option for early game, 99.99999% of late and early game players have a Hyperion and still use it, not just keep it in the museum like you would with a Livid Dagger. That's why it's so strange, because there isn't really any other weapons that you can firmly say that endgame players use on a daily basis that were introduced almost 5 years ago. But almost 5 years later, is it still worth having a Hyperion? I feel like I've probably already answered my own question, but we're still going to put that to the test today. But just before we do, if you are planning on purchasing anything from the Hypixel store, make sure to use code NITROS, it gets yourself 5% off. You can also join the Discord server, it's linked in the description of this video. We offer slayers and dungeon carries, so if you need carries or want to carry, make some coins, make sure to join. Also, if you've not already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now, first of all, the cheapest fully scrolled Hyperion on the market right now is just shy of 1.4 billion. And if you look back over the past couple of years, this is actually quite cheap at the moment. Quite frequently, you'd be paying over 2 billion coins for Hyperion, so 1.3, 1.4 billion is actually not bad at all at the moment, especially when money is easier to make than ever. If you think about newer players that were new to the game maybe 2 or 3 years ago and how easy it was for them to make 1.5 billion compared to newer players nowadays and how easy it is for them to make 1.5 billion, it's not even that difficult to obtain. As long as you make it your primary focus, go through a bit of dungeons, complete a floor 7 and so on. Now the low price is down to the Necron Sandal being ridiculously cheap. There's no doubting or denying the Hyperion's power, but how does it fare when you have lower magical power? Well, of course, first, make sure at minimum you've got yourself an Implosion Belt, because this is going to massively buff the Hyperion, increasing its damage by 25%, and a Gauntlet of Contagion also can't help. So we're going to use the same setup, but adjust our magical power to see how much of a drastic difference this really makes. Another thing to consider is, of course, your Powder Stone. This is going to massively, well, not massively, but this is going to have an impact on how much damage you deal with your Hyperion. If you have the money, definitely go for Bazaar. If you don't have the money, then Sighted is fine, but we'll do a few tests anyway. My magical power is not the greatest. We'll call it 1600 with the Bazaar Power Stone active. Now we can see that the damage that we deal to one enemy is 3.1 million. Around about 3.1 to 3.2 million, which is obviously quite good. Now the great thing about the Hyperion is with ultimate wise on it, you can just spam it and spam it and spam it. If you have a decent setup with mana regeneration and maybe a bit of breeze as well, then you're going to be absolutely sweet. I guess something that is quite important nowadays is attributes, but also making sure that you're maximizing the most amount of intelligence that you can get out of those attributes, and also mana regeneration will help. So we'll take some accessories out of our accessory bag to decrease our magical power, and we'll see how much of a difference magical power actually makes to damage, especially with the Hyperion. Okay, so we're now down at just over 1200 magical power. We're still using the Bazaar Power Stone because I feel like that's what you'd probably have at this point anyway, and we'll see what sort of damage we deal now. Before it was between 3.15 and 3.2 million per hit, and now we're doing 2.9 million per hit. Try again. Yeah, about 2.9 to, well, about 2.95 to 2.3. So just from that 400 magical power that we've lost around about 200k damage, which is relatively substantial. However, it will become more apparent as we go a bit further down in magical power. So we're now down at 1000 magical power. Yeah, man, I know I've got a full inventory. I've got accessories there. But if we take a look at our damage now, that's not helpful because that's 3 mobs. Can we just get one alone? Yeah, 2.85 million. So as you can see, it's going to incrementally go down. Now, It might not seem crazy, but of course I've still got a decent setup. I still have Bazaar on. Well, let's change to Sighted and see how much of a difference that makes. Okay, so now we've switched to Sighted, and at 1000 magical power, we're gaining just shy of 1.2k intelligence and 3 ability damage, as opposed to Bazaar, where we would have been gaining 1.4k intelligence and 5 ability damage. Now, it doesn't seem like a crazy difference, but we'll see what that actually makes to damage. Yeah, so now we're going to deal about 2.6 to 2.7 million damage. You can see just by making a couple of changes that couple with the weapon, how quickly that damage can drop. It's dropped, what, a good few 100k just from making a few tweaks. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is it's not necessarily a bad thing to rush to a Hyperion, because at the end of the day, it changes the game massively. It opens a lot of doors that you previously couldn't go through if you didn't have the Hyperion. But just know that if you do get it at lower MP, it's not going to be as impressive as you probably think it is going to be. Especially if you couple that with relatively low intelligence and obviously relatively low mana regeneration too. Mana regeneration is going to help a lot. Anyway, I mean, why would you even get a Hyperion? Surely there's alternatives that you can get to a Hyperion that are way cheaper, considering it's the best part of 1.5 billion coins to get one, which is still expensive, but relatively inexpensive for the price of the Hyperion over the past couple of years. Now, it would be easy to say, oh yeah, an alternative to Hyperion, you could just use a different mage weapon, like a Midas Staff, which to be honest is probably your next best bet before getting a Hyperion. It deals a ton of one-hit damage, however it does have a cooldown of 1 second, and you have to direct a Midas Staff. There's a few quirks involved with it. It's a very good weapon, it's just not as good as a Hyperion, hence why it's just not as expensive. Its one-hit damage is better than a Hyperion, no doubt about it, but overall it's just not as good in that sense, because it's just not as practical. There's other alternative weapons like the Glacial Scythe, which is also pretty good. It does nowhere near the amount of damage, however, it's like a mini-ranged Hyperion if you're on a budget. There's other weapons too, but I'm just naming mage weapons that aren't the same as the Hyperion, and nothing is exactly the same, but there's a way that we can get a bit closer if we combine a few different items together. For example, if we take a combination of a Jinxed Voodoo Doll or just a Voodoo Doll and a Fire Veil wand. Now, it seems like a weird combination, but I can kind of demonstrate as to how it works. Now, if you don't know how these items work, the Voodoo Doll basically shoots arrows every direction around the targeted monster. Monsters hit by at least one arrow are slowed and receive 213k damage per second for 12 seconds, mana cost of 162, and a 3-second cooldown. And the Fire Veil wand creates a veil of fire around you for 5 seconds, dealing 552k damage per second to mobs within. Of course, pair that with the mage setup. Now, of course, the Hyperion also provides some healing, so you're going to need something to replace that too. I just tried to kill something and died. And to replace it, I'm going to use as a Florid Zombie Sword. You could use something like a Wand of Atonement. It's kind of up to you. Anyway, we're going to test it on Blade Soul because, I don't know, he's a relatively decent challenge. So you use your Voodoo Doll, then you use your Fire Veil wand, and then if you're getting weak, you can always heal a little bit. Use your Voodoo Doll again. Your Fire Veil wand should still be active. Heal a bit more if you need to. And then just make sure you're not taking direct hits, and it dies pretty quickly. It didn't really take long, maybe about 20 seconds. It's not a direct replacement of the Hyperion, let's be completely honest. But a combination like that is something closer to a Hyperion than a different mage weapon. And it's not really a tricky combo to use at all. It's not as good as a Hyperion, it's not as convenient as a Hyperion. You can also just have an Aspects of the Void or an Aspects of the End to teleport as well. Then you've got 4 items next to each other that you've got to switch between rather than just one item that does it all. Obviously, it's not better, it's not the greatest alternative, but it's an alternative if you don't have the money. And this setup would run you around about 20 to 25 mil. Of course, now, you might not do as much damage as I did, considering I've got, somewhat passable Aurora armor. It isn't great, to be completely honest. I've got a G-Drag with a bill in the bank, and of course I'm using the Bizarre Power Stone with 1600 MP. So, yeah. Now, I did mention before that the Hyperion unlocks a lot of the game that you can't really properly do without it. For example, things like lava fishing become really difficult when you don't have a Hyperion. It's painful. Certain aspects of dungeons become painful without a Hyperion. Of course, it does depend on which class you play. Kudra is doable in the lower floors, but realistically, you're going to need a Hype to be able to do Kudra properly. No, that's not it. There's definitely more things in the game that basically rely on you having a Hyperion. But there's some of the main ones. But at the end of the day, it's kind of up to you as to decide whether, you know, it's the right time for you to buy one if you're considering it. Or maybe even the right time to sell yours if you have one but you don't want it or use it. Now, in my opinion, you should never really sell it. It's always going to go up and down in price. But being completely honest, there's nothing that really compares to it still after 5 years in 2025. That's all for today. If you have enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.